Few people in Britain know that when Prince Charles frequently visits Transylvania, he often talks up his direct bloodline with Romania's most famous anti-hero. Yup, Prince Charles and his medieval ancestor Vlad the Impaler, a sadistic prince thought to be the inspiration behind Bram Stoker's Count Dracula. But Vlad had a cousin who was a far more impressive fighter and who left present-day Romania the most spectacular of gifts: Moldova's jaw-dropping painted monasteries. Welcome to Who is Romania and the extraordinary story of Stephen the Great. Proof that today Stephen the Great, or Stefan cel Mare as locals know him, is more cherished than his famous cousin Vlad the Impaler was when a TV contest in Romania asked the public to decide who the 100 greatest Romanians were of all time. Stephen comes in at number 1 and Vlad the Impaler at measly number 11. There was a joke at the time that Stephen the Great was voted in by all his Moldovan descendants. Yes, he had a bit of a reputation with the ladies and apparently more love children than Boris Johnson. Our Romanian Casanova was married at least 3 times. A flamboyant character, this 15th century prince lends well to the remoulding and telling of a heroic Romanian story. And crucially from our point of view, Stephen the Great was not just a standout individual on the battlefield, but also an amazing patron of the arts. He came to power in 1457, just after the fall of Constantinople. That was a big deal. The gateway to Europe had succumbed to the mighty Ottoman infidel. The Turks were literally hammering on the door. It fell to individual princes like Stephen the Great to shore up Europe's Christian borders. He spent most of his 47-year reign fighting. Most famously in 1475, he crushed Sultan Mehmet II's army in the Battle of Vaslui. The victory went viral at the Vatican. Pope Sixtus IV proclaimed him as the athlete of Christ, a rare accolade for a non-Catholic. The Sultan was apoplectic with rage and came thundering north the next year, and this time he actually beat Stephen. In fact, they struck a deal in 1476. Basically, Moldova had to accept Ottoman overlordship. But even so, Stephen's gone down in history as the David who got one over the Goliath of the 15th century. So how did he manage this kind of PR when in the end Stephen had to bend his neck a bit to the Ottomans? Well, and here is where it gets interesting for us. Stephen was a very canny operator. He didn't just win battles, but he celebrated his many victories with the most exquisite art and architecture that's made sure we can never forget him. Long before social media, this man knew a thing or two about image building and propaganda. With enemies on every side, Stephen the Great had always been a tireless builder, constructing citadels and fortifications, restoring his princely seats. But from 1487, he started to focus on commemorative art and monuments, lending neatly to the legend that after every one of his successful battles, he built a monastery. During his reign, at least 30 of the most beautiful medieval Orthodox churches were erected. The painted monasteries, eye candy, that mix Byzantine art with Moldovan magic. Most iconic is Voronezh Monastery. I admit I'm a bit biased. I've been there a couple of times and I was very struck by the religious fervour, the atmosphere of the place, with nuns tending the roses, the inside and the outside of a building that's frequently referred to as the Sistine Chapel of the East. There's a stunning depiction of the Last Judgment on the southern wall, which is really eye-catching. And overall, there's a deep secret held in the frescoes of this monastery, and that's the distinct Voronezh blue colour of the murals. Unique in the world and almost impossible to replicate, it's still amazingly fresh today. But for lots of patriotic and faithful Romanians, it's actually Putna Monastery that's seen as the most important religious and cultural monument built by Stephen the Great. Legend has it he chose the site by firing an arrow from the steep hill that now bears a white cross. Come on, how else would a spectacular warrior choose his own burial site? Because yes, although Putna doesn't have spectacular frescoes like some of the others, it's not only home to one of East Europe's largest Byzantine collections, but it's also where he was buried in 1504. alongside two of his wives, who were both conveniently called Maria. Now, what's the takeaway from this legendary tale of Stephen the Great? Clearly, he was a fine politician, visionary, warrior, and a phenomenal builder. It was under him that Romania acquired the taste for painted monasteries, a tradition that many of his descendants continued. So, if you want to make friends with Romanians, don't knock Stephen the Great, but do visit his monasteries.